She had made it 37 days without being found. 37 days of eating whatever was in her friend's refrigerator. 37 days of sleeping with the light on. 37 days of counting footsteps in the hallway and holding her breath until they passed. 37 days of the same gray hoodie, pulled so far over her face that the world became a narrow strip of floor. She watched as she moved through it. Head down, shoulders curved inward, making herself as small and forgettable as possible. She was very good at being small. She had been practicing for 3 years. Her name was Dara. Dara Okafor, 28 years old. Former graphic designer. Current fugitive, though no missing persons report would describe her that way. The report her husband filed described her as a beloved wife. Emotionally fragile. In need of help. He was very worried. He just wanted her home safe. She had read it on her phone from this very apartment and laughed until she cried. Or cried until she laughed. She still wasn't sure which came first. The apartment belonged to her best friend, Yemi, who was currently in London for a 12-month work contract and had handed over the keys with both hands and a look in her eyes that said everything they hadn't been able to say out loud in years. Take it. Stay as long as you need. I've known about the bruises for longer than you think. Please just go. So she had gone. Seoul, a city she barely knew. A high-rise building in a district where no one looked twice at anyone because everyone was too important to notice anyone else. A 7th-floor apartment with blackout curtains and 3 different locks on the door and a fire escape she had already mentally rehearsed using. She was safe here. She told herself that every morning. Then came the knock at 2 a.m. And listen, if you are new here, you need to stop what you are doing right now. Get comfortable. Because this is not a regular story. This is the kind of story that is going to make you forget you have somewhere to be. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, make sure your notifications are on, and let's get into it. Welcome, besties. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know every single one of you. A wife always knows the sound of the fist that has hit her. Even through a door. Even 3 cities away. Even when she has spent 37 days convincing herself she was finally safe. There is a particular weight to that kind of knock. Not loud, not frantic, but deliberate. Patient in the way that says I know you are in there, and I have done this before, and I am willing to wait you out. Dara's whole body knew before her mind caught up. She pressed her back against the wall, phone in her hand. No one to call. The hoodie she wore even inside the apartment still up, because she had never quite learned how to feel safe enough to take it off. I know you're in there. The voice was low, controlled. The kind of control that had broken her twice and sent her to the hospital once. Open the door, or I'll open it for you. She did not breathe. She did not move. She was still pressed against the wall, calculating whether the fire escape was faster than the front door when the door at the end of the hallway opened. She heard it, even through her own door. A different door. And then, silence. The kind of silence that changes the atmosphere of a room. She pressed her eye to the peephole. She had seen her neighbor only in pieces over the past 37 days. A broad shoulder disappearing into an elevator. A jaw so sharp it looked like it had been cut rather than grown. Eyes that moved through the lobby the way a general surveys territory. Everything assessed, everything categorized, nothing missed. She had put him firmly in the category of men she gave wide berth to. Not because he had ever done anything threatening, but because men who moved like that, like the space around them bent to accommodate them, had always turned out to be a particular kind of dangerous. She was not wrong about the dangerous part. She just hadn't understood yet which direction that danger pointed. He stepped into the hallway in a dark shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking like a man who had been awake when most people were not, which, as she would later learn, was entirely accurate. He looked at the man at her door the way you might look at something you have stepped in, briefly, with mild distaste. And then he said something she couldn't hear through the door, something quiet, something that didn't need volume to carry weight. What happened next took 11 seconds. She counted, because counting was the thing she did when her body forgot how to breathe. Her husband's voice stopped. The knocking stopped. There was a pause, a long, loaded pause, and then the sound of footsteps retreating down the hallway toward the elevator. Just like that. Gone. Dara stood at her peephole and could not process what she had just seen. 3 years. 3 years of convincing herself that there was no stopping him, no redirecting him, no wall he wouldn't push through. And this man, this stranger she had spent 37 days carefully avoiding, had said 11 seconds worth of words, and her husband had simply left. She was still trying to understand that when his voice came through her door. Low. Not loud enough to carry to anyone else. Not demanding. Just present. You can breathe, he said. He's gone. She didn't move. I know you're there, he continued, with the same calm. I'm not going to stand here all night. But I'm also not going to leave until I know you're all right. So, take your time. He wasn't lying. He stood there, back against the opposite wall, arms loosely crossed, looking like a man who had genuinely nowhere else to be and no particular feelings about that. No urgency. No performance. Just an almost absurd patience that didn't match his face at all, because his face was the kind of face that belonged to a man who did not wait for anything. Dara opened the door. She didn't decide to. Her hand just moved. The light from the hallway fell across her face, and she watched. She couldn't help watching, as his expression changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't the kind of man whose feelings moved loudly across his features. But something shifted in his eyes when he took in the bruise along her jaw, the split in her lip that had healed imperfectly, the left eye that still didn't open quite all the way 3 weeks after the last time. It wasn't pity. She was familiar with pity. Pity looked away quickly, embarrassed to have seen too much. This didn't look away. This was the look of a man doing an inventory, filing things carefully, deciding something. You should go inside, he said. Calm. Steady. Lock the door. You're safe for tonight. She nodded. Her hand found the light switch. She locked the door, all 3 locks, in order, the way she always did, and stood in the middle of the apartment and waited for the shaking to stop. It didn't stop. Because he had walked away and her husband had walked away, but the night hadn't walked away, and the knowing that he had found her, that 37 days was all she got, that nowhere was actually far enough, sat on her chest like something physical, and she couldn't breathe around it, and before she understood what was happening, her back was against the wall, and the floor was underneath her, and she was sitting on the ground in the dark still, in her hoodie shaking like it was January. The knock on her door was 3 taps. Soft. Nothing like before. She didn't move. I can't hear you. His voice, through the door. Lower this time. Something careful in it. I'm not going anywhere. Take your time. She sat on that floor for a long time. Long enough for the shaking to slow, but not stop. Long enough to have the internal argument with herself. The one where one part said get up, you don't know this man. And the other part said the bruise on your jaw is 3 weeks old, and you are still shaking at 2 a.m., and how is that plan working out for you? She found her legs. She opened the door the second time. He was still there, still leaning against the opposite wall. He had not moved. He was looking at the floor, not the door, like a man who had made a decision to give her all the time she needed and was actually honoring it rather than just saying the words. When he looked up, she braced herself. For the questions. For the careful tone. For the particular way people's faces arranged themselves when they were confronted with obvious damage and didn't know what to do with it. You shouldn't be alone tonight, he said. She opened her mouth. My apartment, he said, before she could find the refusal. You'll have the guest room. Door with a lock, your own key. I'll stay on the other side of the apartment. You won't owe me anything. You won't have to talk. You don't even have to look at me. Dara stared at him. She was very good at reading men. 3 years of survival had sharpened that into something close to a superpower. She could read impatience disguised as calm. She could read entitlement dressed as kindness. She could read the specific flavor of a man who helped you so that you would owe him, and the even more specific flavor of a man who helped you so that he could feel good about himself. She read none of those things. What she read instead was harder to name. Something that looked, bizarrely, like restraint. Like a man who was very deliberately taking up less space than he was capable of. I don't know you, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. No, he agreed. He didn't try to fix that. Didn't offer his name like it was supposed to mean something. Didn't list reasons she should trust him. Didn't lean forward or reach out or do any of the things that would have sent her back against the wall. He just waited. And somehow, that was the most convincing thing he could have done. She picked up her bag from just inside the door. The one she had never unpacked. The one she kept packed because leaving quickly had saved her before. He turned and walked toward his apartment. Didn't check if she was following. Didn't make her feel like a project he was managing. She followed. His apartment was at the end of the hall. The door opened into something quiet and clean and nothing like the danger she associated with his face. He walked her down a hallway and opened a door to a guest room that looked untouched. White duvet, clean lines, a window with a lock she could see from the doorway, and stepped aside. "Keys on the dresser," he said. She walked in. She picked up the key. It was small and cold in her palm. "Thank you," she said, to the floor. "Lock it," he said gently. And then his footsteps moved away down the hall. Unhurried, unbothered. The footsteps of a man who had done a thing and required nothing in return for it. And she stood in the middle of a locked room and realized, slowly, that the shaking had stopped. She sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know that half the country whispered it like a warning. She didn't know that the man who had knocked on her door that night was currently receiving a very terse phone call from his head of security, who had watched the parking garage footage and was now asking whether to proceed. She didn't know about the reply that security received. She didn't know what happened to her husband in that parking garage. She would find out later. For now, she only knew one thing. She reached up, slowly, like something she had forgotten how to do, and pulled her hoodie off. For the first time in 37 days, she sat somewhere without counting the exits. The morning came the way mornings do after terrible nights, quietly, indifferently, the sun arriving without any acknowledgement of the drama it was interrupting. Dara woke up before she remembered where she was, which meant the first 3 seconds were peaceful. Then she remembered. Then she looked at the locked door and the unfamiliar ceiling and felt the particular quality of silence that belongs to other people's spaces. Then she smelled coffee. She sat with that for a moment. Coffee was a normal thing. Coffee was a morning thing. Coffee was not a threatening thing. She had to actively remind herself of this because 3 years had done interesting things to her relationship with normal. She unlocked the door quietly, half convinced she would open it to something she had to flee from. He was in the kitchen, back to her, making what appeared to be a very serious and concentrated amount of breakfast for one person. No, for two, she realized, because there were 2 plates on the counter, and he was plating food onto both of them with the focused precision of a man who did not do things halfway. He hadn't heard her yet. She took a moment, one she would never admit to taking, to simply look at him. In the daylight and without the adrenaline of the night before, he was almost unsettling to look at directly. Not in a bad way. In the way of things that are so precisely what they are that they feel slightly unreal. Tall, wide shoulders that tapered into a back that looked like it had been engineered rather than grown. Black hair slightly unsettled from sleep. A jaw that belonged on a statue in a museum that you weren't allowed to touch. He was, objectively and inconveniently, one of the most attractive people Dara had ever seen. She found this extremely annoying. He turned around and caught her staring, and she had just enough dignity to look at the coffee maker instead, which was absolutely unconvincing, and they both knew it. "Good morning," he said. His voice was different in daylight. Still low, still calm, but with slightly less of the 2 a.m. gravity. "Sit. Eat something. I should go back. After you eat." She blinked. He pulled out a stool at the kitchen island and placed a plate on the counter in front of it. Eggs, toast, something that smelled like it involved garlic and butter and excellent decisions. He did this without looking at her, without any expectation visible on his face, like a man who had made breakfast and was now simply making an offering and was genuinely neutral about whether it was accepted. Dara sat down. She was not neutral. She was starving. She had been eating crackers and instant noodles for a week because leaving the apartment for real groceries required going outside for longer than 30 seconds, and 30 seconds was the most she had felt safe in the open. She ate. He sat across from her with his own plate and his coffee and said nothing, which she found, bafflingly, more comfortable than conversation. She was 3 bites in when she thought to ask, "What did you say to him last night?" He looked up. His eyes were very dark. Not black, a deep layered brown that had black at the center and something else at the edges that she couldn't categorize. "I told him he had the wrong address," he said. She waited. That couldn't be all. He looked back at his plate. "And I gave him some context about what happens to men who come to this building at 2 a.m. looking for women who don't want to be found." "What kind of context?" "The kind that doesn't require elaboration." She looked at him for a long moment. He was eating breakfast. He looked like a man describing something mildly administrative, like he had simply resolved an inconvenience and moved on. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked up again. Something passed across his face, quick, almost amused. "Kale," he said. "Kale Ryan." The name meant nothing to her. She filed it away. Dara, she said. I know, he said. She went very still. I had you checked out 2 weeks ago, he said, with the complete calm of a man who did not see this as alarming information. Someone new in this building who wore a hood in July and memorized all the exits on the first day. In my experience, that is either someone running from something or someone looking for something. I needed to know which. And what did you find? Your name, your friend's lease, your husband's missing persons report, a pause, and some other things. She didn't ask about the other things. The way he said it told her she would find out eventually, and that he had already handled whatever needed handling, which was either deeply reassuring or deeply unsettling, and she hadn't decided which. You should know, he said, that he won't come back here. You can't know that. I can, he said simply. And then he picked up his coffee cup and drank from it, and the conversation was apparently over. Dara sat in this stranger's kitchen eating the best scrambled eggs she had had in months, and tried to make sense of a man who ran background checks on his neighbors, talked down domestic abusers at 2 a.m. with 11 words, and made breakfast with the seriousness of a Michelin chef. She also tried, with limited success, to stop noticing how good he looked in the morning light. This was going to be a problem. She could already tell. Now hold on. Hold on. Because I need you to go and smash that like button right now. Not later, right now. Because what I am about to tell you about Kale Ryan and what is actually going on in that apartment building is going to change everything. Don't miss a single second. Subscribe if you haven't. Let's continue. The thing about Kale Ryan was this. He was, on paper, the CEO of Ryan Holdings, a real estate and investment conglomerate that owned approximately 1/5 of the most valuable commercial property in the country. He was in every business magazine. He attended government galas. He shook hands with ministers and smiled for cameras with the practiced ease of a man who had been in rooms of power for so long that he had forgotten there was any other kind of room. This was the public Kale. The private Kale was the reason grown men in 3 countries lost sleep. The CN organization, named after the ghost of its founder, never after its current head, because current heads did not put their names on things that the law could trace, operated in the spaces between what the law could see and what money could buy. It was not crude. It was not theatrical. It did not deal in the kind of violence that made headlines. It dealt in information, influence, territory, and the particular kind of justice that existed in places where official justice had a waiting list and a price tag. Kale had taken the organization at 23 when his father died. He was now 31. In 8 years he had tripled its reach, modernized its structure, and made it quietly, immovably untouchable. His enemies, and there were many, had tried everything from law enforcement to hired professionals, and every attempt had returned to them in some form that communicated, without theater, that this was not advisable. He was not a good man in the way that the word is usually meant. He was, however, a man with a very precise and personal code. And somewhere in that code, written in the kind of ink that doesn't come off, was something about people who used their power to destroy people who had none. His own mother had had bruises he only understood the origin of when he was 12. His father had explained them in the manner of men who believe explanation is the same as justification. Kale had not spoken to his father after that. When his father died, Kale had not cried. He had, however, looked at his mother's wrists and promised her something quietly that she had not fully understood until 2 years later when she was living in a house on Jeju Island that he had bought outright with no strings and no conditions. He did not talk about this. It was not relevant to anything he did professionally, except that when he saw Dara Okafor step into his building on day 3, hoodie up, head down, flinching at sound, mapping the lobby exits with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to do it without knowing they were doing it. Something in him had gone very, very still. He had watched her for 2 weeks. Not with suspicion anymore. That had resolved itself quickly once his people dug up the basics. He watched because he couldn't quite explain why he kept watching. She was careful and quiet, and when the elevator came and other people got in, she always stepped back and waited for the next one, and there was something about that. Something about a person who had learned to take up as little space as possible and now couldn't stop, that made his chest do something inconvenient. He did not examine this closely. He was very busy. He told himself this for 2 weeks. Then she had sat across from him at his kitchen island eating scrambled eggs and looked at him with those eyes. dark and deep and currently occupied by equal parts wariness and something she was clearly trying to extinguish. And he had thought, I'm going to have to be very careful here. He was not always careful, but for her, he was going to try. The week that followed was strange and quiet and oddly, unexpectedly comfortable. She went back to her own apartment. That had been the plan. But she found herself accepting his standing invitation to have dinner. Not a formal invitation, just a quiet knock on his door at 7 p.m. on the second day, because she had run out of actual food, and the embarrassment of that was less than the embarrassment of asking him to explain the standing invitation again. He opened the door, looked at her, looked at the sad little can of beans in her hand, and took it from her without a word and put it on the counter like evidence. I had a very complicated morning, she said. I can see that, he said, and turned back to the stove. She sat at the island and watched him cook, really cook, not just functionally cook, but with the kind of focused attention that suggested it was something he actually liked doing, and discovered that Kale Ryan, feared by nations, was also the kind of person who narrated what he was doing while he cooked without seeming to realize he was doing it. This is doenjang jjigae, he said, like she had asked. My grandmother made it. Most people make it wrong. They rush the fermented paste. It needs time, or it's just salty. How long does it need? 3 minutes. Minimum. Nobody has time for that apparently. You clearly do. I make time for things that matter. He said it simply, without looking at her, and she didn't know if it was just about the soup or something else, and she wasn't going to ask. She picked up her phone and looked at nothing and tried to ignore the warmth in her chest that had absolutely no business being there. They ate. They talked. Not about anything significant, not about husbands or organizations or parking garages, but about food in the city and the absolute audacity of Seoul real estate prices and the fact that the convenience store downstairs charged 40% more for bottled water than the one 2 blocks away. Dara made him laugh twice. The first time she was so startled by it, by the way it changed his whole face, turned it briefly into something younger and less carved from stone, that she forgot what she had said that caused it. She liked that she had caused it. This was extremely problematic, and she decided to deal with it never. But here is where things began to get complicated. Because Kale Ryan had enemies. Plural. And those enemies had noticed something new. His head of security, a composed and terrifyingly efficient man named Seo Jiran who had been with Kale for 7 years and whose primary personality trait was that he had no visible personality traits, came to him on Thursday with a tablet and a look. Someone's been watching the building, Jiran said. External surveillance. Stationary, north side. They've been there 3 days. Kale looked at the footage. A car. Ordinary enough if you didn't know what to look for. He knew what to look for. The Cha faction, he said. Not a question. Almost certainly. They've been quiet since the summit meeting fell apart in February. This could be preliminary mapping. Or, Kale said, it could be something else. He looked at Jiran. Her husband. Where is he currently? Jiran's expression, already minimalist, somehow became more so. Back in Busan. He has not returned to Seoul. Keep it that way. There is also, Jiran paused. This was notable because Jiran never paused. There are some within the organization who have noticed your attention toward the occupant of 714. Kale looked at him flatly. Not in a way that suggests judgment, Jiran added. More curiosity. Tell them their curiosity is misdirected and they should redirect it toward the north side surveillance. Understood. He left. Kale stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, the real office, the one that wasn't in any business directory, and looked out over the city that was half his and thought about a woman 3 floors up who kept her shoes by the door and slept with the lights on and laughed like she had been briefly surprised by the existence of joy. The Cha faction was going to be a problem. He had known this since February. He had also known, since approximately the first evening Dara sat at his kitchen island, that involving her proximity, even accidentally, in his professional reality was not something he would allow. She had already survived one man who made her world dangerous. She was not going to survive it again. Not while he was breathing. He was going to have to be very careful. He was also going to have to be honest with himself about why the thought of anything happening to her produced a specific and very targeted kind of cold fury that he had previously only reserved for threats to his mother. He looked at the city. He was not always careful, but he was going to try. Meanwhile, up in apartment 714, Dara was having her own quiet crisis of an entirely different variety. She was video calling Yemi in London, which she did every few days, and she had made the critical error of mentioning her neighbor in a tone that was approximately 4 degrees warmer than neutral and Yemi, who had the emotional radar of a satellite dish and the restraint of a golden retriever, had immediately sat up very straight. "I'm sorry," Yemi said. "Back up. What neighbor?" "The one at the end of the hall. The terrifyingly attractive one you mentioned one time, and then immediately said was not your business." "I didn't say he was terrifyingly attractive. You said, and I quote, 'He has a face that should be illegal,' and then moved on like you hadn't said anything." Dara looked at the ceiling. "He made me soup." The noise Yemi made could only be described as triumphant. It was just, he cooks, and it's not a thing, Yemi. I'm barely out of a 3-year nightmare and he's very clearly not a simple person, and I am in no way. Dara, what? Is he kind to you? She stopped. She thought about the key on the dresser. The breakfast without questions. The careful space he gave her. The way he talked about his grandmother's soup recipe, like it was something worth protecting. "Yes," she said quietly. "Then let someone be kind to you," Yemi said. "You've earned it. You've more than earned it." She didn't answer that. She pulled her knee up to her chest and looked at the window. She had spent 3 years with a man who told her kindness had a price, who made her feel grateful for the days between the bad days, who had reduced her, slowly and systematically, to a woman who wore a hoodie to go to the mailbox and counted exits in every room she entered. She did not know how to receive kindness that had no bill attached. She was going to have to learn. A few days later, Kale did something he would look back on as either very smart or catastrophically inadvisable. He took her for coffee. It wasn't planned. Or it was, but not formally. He came to her door on a Saturday morning and said he was going to the cafe downstairs, and did she want to come? And he said it in the same tone that he said everything. Calm, low, no pressure wrapped inside it. And she had said yes before she fully processed that she was saying yes. She wore the hoodie. Of course she wore the hoodie. But she also, he noticed, wore earrings. Small gold studs. He noticed them the way he noticed everything. Completely, immediately, without letting it show. The cafe downstairs had a back corner table that was, by general unspoken agreement among everyone in the building who knew who Kale was, always empty. They sat there. He ordered for both of them after asking her one question, sweet or not sweet, with the efficiency of a man who found menus an unnecessary exercise. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "What do you actually do?" He looked at her. "I run a real estate and investment group." That's the official answer. His mouth curved. Very slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it was in the neighborhood. That's the current answer. And the unofficial answer? Is something for a different conversation. Why? Because this is a Saturday morning, and you're holding your coffee with both hands like it might escape, and you look like someone who is approximately 4 days away from deciding you're allowed to be happy again, and I don't want to ruin that with an unofficial answer. She stared at him. He looked at his own cup. She felt that sentence land somewhere in the middle of her chest, and stay there like it had found a room and moved in. "That's a very specific observation," she said finally. "I'm a specific person. You're a strange person." "Also true." She laughed. She hadn't meant to. It came out quiet and a little bit rusty, like something that had been in storage, but it came out. And when she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully name. Something careful and warm and almost unbearably concentrated. She looked back at her coffee. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For all of it. The room. The food. Last week. You don't have to thank me. I want to." A pause. "Then you're welcome," he said. They sat in the back corner of the cafe on a Saturday morning and drank their coffee and didn't need to fill the silence, and Dara thought, "This is the most peaceful I have felt in 3 years." She did not say this out loud, but she thought it, and she held it, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't immediately look for the thing that was about to go wrong. Except, of course, something was about to go wrong. Because there was a man 2 tables away, one of those casually handsome men who exist in cities and are fully aware of it, who had been watching Dara since she sat down. He was there when they arrived, nursing an espresso, and he had looked at her the way men look at beautiful women in cafes when they are considering whether to do something about it. He waited until Kale's phone rang, and Kale stepped away from the table. Briefly, no more than 2 minutes. And then he materialized at her table with a smile that was practiced and probably effective on most days. I don't usually do this, he said, which was the calling card of a man who did this constantly. But I've been sitting over there trying to convince myself not to come over and... I'm here with someone, Dara said. Right. But I saw you come in and you seemed... She said she's here with someone. Neither of them had heard Cale come back. He was standing beside the table, phone in his hand, expression entirely neutral, but neutral in the way of a sky that is very, very still before a system comes through. The man looked at Cale. Something in Cale's stillness communicated things that his expression didn't need to. The man looked back at Dara, then back at Cale. My bad, he said, with the good sense that most people eventually found when faced with that particular stillness. He went back to his table. He left shortly after. Cale sat back down. He did not say anything. He picked up his coffee cup. He was very composed. He was being very composed in the way of someone who was working at it. Dara looked at him. You're annoyed, she said. I'm not annoyed. Your jaw is doing a thing. He put the coffee cup down with slightly more precision than necessary. I'm not annoyed, he said again, in the tone of a man who was, in fact, annoyed and had opinions about being observed having feelings. She should not have found this charming. It was objectively very charming. She looked at the table to hide the fact that she was trying not to smile. For what it's worth, she said, I wasn't interested. A pause. I didn't say you were, he said. Evenly. No, she agreed. You didn't. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something moved between them in the loaded air of that unsaid conversation, and then he looked away first, which surprised her, and she realized that Cale Ryan, who ran buildings and made men leave with 11 words and cooked fermented soybean paste with the patience of a monk, was not entirely sure what to do with her. This was the most comforting thing she had discovered yet. Oh, I see you reading. I see you glued to this screen right now. Good. Because if you think this Saturday morning coffee situation is something, wait until you see what happens next. But first, if you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right now. Drop a comment telling me who you are rooting for. And share this with one friend who needs a good story in their life. Now let's go. The following week arrived with a tension Dara couldn't fully account for. It wasn't between them, or not only. It was in the building. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, through the smallest, strangest details. Jaron, Cale's security chief, who she had come to recognize by his very specific quality of blending into backgrounds, was suddenly more present. 3 men she hadn't seen before occupied a car in the parking structure. The building's lobby staff had been quietly doubled. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would alarm an ordinary resident. Dara was not, at this point, an ordinary resident. She knocked on his door on Tuesday evening, and when he opened it she said, Something's happening. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he stepped aside to let her in. He told her some of it. Not all. He measured out what she needed and stopped at the edges of what would only frighten her without helping her. The Cha faction, a rival organization that had spent years trying to dismantle the Cian organization's territory and had recently escalated from corporate sabotage into something more direct. They had been surveilling the building. There was no current evidence of a planned action, but in his world, surveillance preceded action the way thunder preceded lightning. She listened. She did not panic, which he noted with something that was partly relief and partly a different kind of respect. She asked 2 questions, practical, direct, and then she was quiet for a moment. Are they a danger to anyone else in the building? I'm managing it. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. He looked at her for a moment the way he sometimes did, with that complete, undivided attention that she had come to find both overwhelming and oddly safe. No, he said. They're not interested in collateral. They're specific. But they might become interested in me, she said. Because of my proximity to you. I won't let that happen. You say that like you're in charge of what happens to me. I'm in charge of what happens in this building. Cale. He stopped. She had used his name, his first name, and neither of them had quite noticed when that had started. He went still in the particular way he went still when something caught him genuinely off guard. I'm not a territory, she said. Softly. Not with anger. With the particular kind of clarity that comes from 3 years of having someone treat you like a thing they owned. You can't manage me. You can tell me the truth and let me make my own decisions. That's all I'm asking. A long pause. You're right, he said. She blinked. I know you're not a territory, he said. I know you're not something to be managed. He stopped. He seemed to briefly consider his words in the way of a man who was not accustomed to reaching for them. Old habits. Control is the tool I have. It's not always the right one. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her chest did the inconvenient thing it had been doing increasingly often. Okay, she said quietly. Then tell me what I actually need to know. No management. Just honesty. You should stay close for the next few days, he said. Not because I'm controlling your movements. Because there are people outside this building who don't yet know you exist, and I would like to keep it that way until I've resolved this. And if you can't resolve it quickly, I will resolve it quickly. She looked at him. I hear the management reflex in that sentence, she said. He looked at the ceiling. She laughed. He looked back at her, caught between dignity and amusement, and landed somewhere in the middle that made him look human and young and wildly, inconveniently attractive. I'll resolve it, he said, with slightly less certainty and slightly more of something real in his voice. I'm going to try. She nodded. That's better. 3 days later, she met Kale's mother. This was not planned by anyone. He had mentioned his mother once, briefly, in passing, in a conversation about the Dunjang Jigi, and Dara had stored the detail quietly and asked nothing, because she was still learning how to ask things of this man without bracing for the asking to be used against her. His mother, he had said, lived on Jeju Island. She was well. She was, in the way he said it, careful, warm, slightly too specifically careful, clearly important. What he had not mentioned was that his mother occasionally came to Seoul unannounced. Dara was crossing the lobby, hoodie down for the first time in 44 days, a quiet, private milestone she had not told anyone. When the elevator opened, and a woman in her late 50s stepped out with the posture of someone who had decided decades ago what she thought of the world and was comfortable with that assessment. She was small, sharply dressed, and had her son's eyes. That same layered darkness, the same quality of seeing everything at once. She saw Dara and stopped. Dara stopped. The woman looked at Dara's face the way Kale had looked at it on the first night, completely, missing nothing, the bruises that were now almost healed, the still careful way Dara stood in open spaces. Then she looked at her with something else entirely, something that was warm and knowing and slightly sorrowful and very, very gentle. You're the one in 714, the woman said. In Korean first, then careful English. Kale mentioned someone. He did, Dara said, unable to conceal the surprise. In the way men mention things they can't stop thinking about, she said, with the supreme composure of a woman who had been reading between her son's lines for 31 years. I'm Ryan Heisu. Dara. I know. The woman smiled. It was Kale's smile. That same not quite but almost quality. He made me look you up. He said for safety purposes. And I told him that was the least convincing thing he has ever said to me, and he has said some very unconvincing things. Dara laughed, surprised again, genuinely, the rusty kind, and Jesu's smile deepened. Have dinner with us tonight, she said. Not a question, not unlike her son, but warmer. He cooks better when there's someone to cook for. He just won't admit it. Dara should have said no. She had a list of reasons she should have said no. She had been building the list for weeks. Okay, she said. She threw the whole list away. That night at dinner, something shifted. Not dramatically. It wasn't a declaration or a gesture or a moment with music behind it. It was simpler than that. It was watching Kale with his mother. Watching him move around her with an attentiveness that was quiet and whole. Refilling her water without being asked. Cutting things into smaller pieces like he'd been doing it for years. Listening to her stories with his full attention in a way he gave to very little else. Watching him be soft in the specific, private way that men who are hard with everyone else are soft with the people they love most. Dara sat across the table and felt something in herself go very quiet. This man, who had talked down a threat in 11 words and run background checks on his neighbors, and sat across from her with the stillness of a person who had made very permanent decisions about very impermanent people, loved his mother with something uncomplicated and absolute. She had thought she knew what kind of person he was. She kept having to revise that. Jesu caught her watching and looked down at her food with a smile that she tried to make invisible and didn't quite succeed. After dinner, when Jesu had retired to the guest room with a warmth that managed to be entirely sincere and entirely knowing at the same time, Dara and Kale washed dishes in the kitchen in a silence that was different from the usual kind. Heavier, warmer, charged with something neither of them had given a name to yet. She likes you, he said, setting a glass on the rack. I like her, Dara said. She's a lot. She's everything, he said simply. Dara looked at him. I know about your father, she said, carefully. He had not told her, but Yemi had done some digging after Dara mentioned his name and had texted her a series of escalating messages that concluded with, Dara, do you know who this man is? He went still. What do you know? Not details. Just, I know it wasn't easy. And I know she got out. A pause. I know you made sure she could. He was quiet for a long time. He set down the dish he was drying and looked at his hands on the counter. She didn't tell anyone for years, he said. Not even me. Not until I was old enough to understand what I was seeing on my own. A pause. By the time I understood, I had already decided what I was going to do about it. Is that why? She stopped. Why what? Why you didn't leave me in the hallway, she said quietly. He turned to look at her. Full, direct, with that completeness of attention that still undid her every time. Yes, he said. Just that. No elaboration. No performance. She nodded. She looked at the dish in her hands. Thank you, she said. For the second time. With a different weight behind it. You keep thanking me, he said. You keep doing things worth thanking. He was quiet. Then, Dara. She looked up. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the elevator, like he was doing an inventory. But this time the inventory wasn't of damage. It was something else. Something that moved slowly from her eyes to the curve of her mouth to the gold studs in her ears that she wore now almost every day, and back up. I need you to know something, he said. She waited. This, he paused. Reconsidered. He was choosing his words with the precision of a man who didn't get to retract them. Whatever this is. I haven't. I'm not accustomed to it. I don't know that I'm good at it. I'm likely going to do things wrong. A pause. But I'm in it. Whatever this is. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment. That's either the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, or the least specific declaration of intention I've ever heard. Both, he said. Probably both. She laughed. He watched her laugh, and something in his face did the thing it did. Briefly younger, briefly different, briefly not carved from stone. Kale, she said, when the laughing settled. I'm in it too. She looked at the dish. Whatever it is. I'm scared. I want to be honest about that. I'm still scared of a lot of things. But I'm not scared of you. Not anymore. The kitchen was quiet. He reached out, and, very slowly, very carefully, the way someone handles something they know is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it is precious. He took the dish out of her hands and set it on the counter, and then he took her hand instead. Just that. He held her hand. She looked at their hands. Then at him. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he said. But here is what neither of them knew while they were having that moment in the kitchen. 3 blocks away, in the back of a car, a man named Cha Dowan, head of the Cha faction, patient, intelligent, and deeply invested in the downfall of Kale Ryan, was looking at photographs. Photographs of a woman in a gray hoodie. Photographs of a cafe table. Photographs of a Saturday morning. Who is she? He said. The man beside him answered. Dowan looked at the photographs for a long moment. Does he care about her? He said. The answer was visible in the photographs to anyone who knew how to look. Dowan set them down. He was quiet in the way of a man making decisions. Good, he said. If you are not on the edge of your seat right now, check your pulse. Because, beloved, this story is about to go to places. Subscribe right now if you haven't, because I am not going to let you find out later by accident that you missed the most intense part. Comment below, what do you think Cha Dowan is about to do? Let's go. It happened on a Wednesday. Dara had gone to the small market 2 streets over, the first time she had gone more than a block from the building alone, a quiet act of reclaiming territory she told no one about. Hoodie down, gold earrings in, a list in her hand because Yemi had texted her a recipe she wanted to try, and Yemi had very specific opinions about whether the gochujang was the right brand, and the specificity was enough to make Dara laugh in the middle of the produce aisle, which earned her a look from an elderly man nearby. She was looking at 2 nearly identical bags of sesame seeds, trying to determine if there was genuinely a qualitative difference or if Yemi was just an enthusiast, when someone bumped into her from behind. She turned. 2 men. Big. Position wrong. Not the awkward positioning of strangers in a crowded aisle, but the deliberate positioning of people who had arranged themselves around a target. She knew, before they said anything, because the body knows. The same way her body had known the sound of that knock. The same way her body had learned, over 3 years, to read danger before her mind caught up. She moved. She didn't panic, and this surprised her, later, when she looked back. She moved, and she said "excuse me" to the elderly man with the produce, and she kept her feet walking steadily toward the door, because running attracted attention, and she needed the street, not a back exit. She needed the populated street. She was 3 feet from the exit when a hand closed around her arm. "Ms. Okafor," one of them said, in a voice that was pleasant and completely devoid of pleasantness. "Please don't make this complicated." And then her phone was ringing. The screen said, "Kale." She answered it. "I'm at the Haesung Market," she said. She kept her voice very steady. "2 streets over. I seem to have run into a problem." A pause on the line. Very short. "Stay on the phone," he said. "Don't go anywhere they direct you. Stand in the most public part of the store you can reach. Do not hang up." The man gripping her arm had heard enough of this to be recalibrating. He looked at his colleague. The calculation was visible. They had expected easy and were now receiving something else. "Let go of my arm," Dara said, to the man holding it. In her own voice, without shaking. She had found this voice in the weeks since she had pulled off her hoodie. This bedrock voice that was still there, had always been there, under the 3 years of being reduced. He did not let go. What happened next happened very fast. The store window. The door. 3 men who had not been there a moment ago, and were now very much there. Juran at the front, with the blank expression of a man who treats all professional matters as equivalent regardless of whether those matters are scheduling meetings or something else entirely. The 2 men received a brief conversation that they seemed to understand was not actually a conversation. The hand on Dara's arm disappeared. And then Kale was in the doorway. He had come himself. She had not expected that. She understood, from things she had been gradually learning, that men in his position did not typically go themselves. They sent people. He had sent people and then come himself anyway, which told her something she filed away quietly and took out later when she needed it. He crossed the store in a few strides and stopped in front of her and looked at her face. The same inventory. And then, apparently satisfied with the results, said, "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. He exhaled. Very small. Almost invisible. "I'm fine," she said. "I handled it." "You did," he said. They looked at each other in the middle of the market with 2 bags of sesame seeds and the aftermath of something that could have been much worse and wasn't, and Dara thought, "I am not the woman I was 37 days ago. Something has been shifting back into place. Slowly and imperfectly, and with a lot of bad days still threaded through the good ones, but shifting." She held up the sesame seeds. "Yemi has opinions about brands," she said. "I need your help." He looked at the sesame seeds. He looked at her. Something broke very quietly on his face. The composure, just for a second. And he made a sound that was almost a laugh. "The left one," he said. She put the right one back. That evening, things came to a head. Not the Cha faction. That was still being resolved, in the systematic and efficient and unreported way that Kale resolved things. Something different. Something smaller and more dangerous in its own way. He told her. He told her properly. Not the careful, measured version he had given before, but the whole shape of it. What the organization was. What he was. What he had built and why, and what it had cost him, and what it meant about the world they were moving in. He told her in his living room with the city lit up behind him and his hands loose in his lap, and the particular vulnerability of a man who was used to being known by reputation and almost never known in fact. She listened. When he finished, the room was quiet. "I know some of this already," she said. "I know. I looked you up. After Yemi sent me about 40 increasingly alarmed messages." He looked at the floor. Somewhere in there was the ghost of something mortified. "And," he said. "And I kept coming to dinner anyway," she said. He looked up. "Which tells you something," she said. "About what I already felt. Before the full picture." She looked at him. "I'm not going to pretend the full picture is simple. It's not. You do things I don't entirely understand, and probably wouldn't endorse, and there are things about your world that scare me." A pause. "But I watched you feed your mother soup and hold my hand in a kitchen, and I know what that means. I know the difference between a man who is dangerous because he likes being dangerous and a man who became something in order to survive and protect, and I." She stopped. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I think that's the most important thing. I have been afraid for 3 years. I know what fear feels like. And you're not it." He was quiet for a long moment. "I won't ask you to accept everything," he said. I only want. I know what you want, she said softly. Do you? You want me to stay, she said. Not in the guest room. Not as a neighbor. You want me to stay. He looked at her with that entire, undivided, overwhelming attention of his. Yes, he said. She breathed. I'm not there yet, she said. Honestly. Carefully. I need time to trust my own feelings because the last time I trusted my feelings about a man, they lied to me very thoroughly for a very long time. So I need to take this slowly and be sure of myself before I can be sure of anything else. Okay, he said. That doesn't frustrate you? Dara. He said her name the way he sometimes did, like it was something worth saying correctly. The only thing I need you to be is honest with me. You can take all the time that exists. She looked at him. She wanted to tell him, in that moment, that she already knew. That the time was mostly a formality at this point because she had known something for weeks, had known it in the cafe, in the kitchen, standing in a market with sesame seeds, and her pulse steady when it used to race. That she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for, and it looked like a man who made doenjang jjigae and held her hand, and came to a grocery store himself because she called. But she gave herself the time. Because she had told the truth, she owed it to herself to be sure. And Kale Ryan, who had spent his life moving fast and taking things by force of will and decision, sat back in his chair and waited. Because she was worth it. She was worth every second of patience he had ever been capable of, and several seconds beyond that. Weeks passed. The Cha faction situation concluded in the way Kale's situations concluded, thoroughly, quietly, in a manner that didn't make the news, but that certain people in certain rooms understood completely. Cha Dowan was, through a sequence of events that would take longer to explain than was relevant, no longer a concern. The surveillance card disappeared. The extra security gradually stood down. The building returned to its ordinary level of quietly controlled. Dara's husband had not reappeared. He would not reappear. Jiran had seen to the specifics of that with a visit that had involved no violence, and an extraordinary amount of documentation that Dara's husband very much did not want to become public. The divorce papers were filed from Seoul, handled by a lawyer Kale had arranged without being asked, and had simply placed the contact details on the kitchen island with no comment. She had used them. It had taken 2 weeks, and was the cleanest ending to the worst chapter of her life she could have hoped for. She started a design project. Small, a branding job for a friend of Yemi's, something that let her ease back into work from the apartment without being out in the world before she was ready. She sat up at the dining table with her laptop and her drawing tablet, and Kale periodically brought her coffee without interrupting, which she found out was a deliberate and considered strategy when she caught him telling his phone to remind him not to talk when she was working. She made him the most offended face she was capable of. You set a reminder, she said. It's effective. To not talk to me. You concentrate better when I don't narrate. I concentrate better when you acknowledge that I'm a person and not a productivity output. He looked at the ceiling. I was trying to be considerate. By setting a calendar alert. Yes. She stared at him for a long moment. He was entirely serious. This man, who had dismantled a rival criminal organization with the brisk efficiency of someone clearing an inbox, had put a reminder on his phone so he wouldn't accidentally distract her. You are the strangest person I have ever met, she said. Probably, he agreed. She went back to her design. She was smiling. She didn't tell him she was smiling. He could probably tell anyway. One evening she came home from a brief coffee with a designer she had met at a local studio, her first outing that was entirely social, entirely voluntary, entirely for herself. And Kale was in the hallway outside her apartment when she got off the elevator. He was not there to intercept her. He was leaning against the wall in that way he had, arms crossed, looking at his phone, and he looked up when she came down the hall and said, "How was it?" She realized, in that moment, that she had told him she was going. She had updated him. Not because he asked, he never asked, never monitored, never made her account for her movements, but because she had wanted to. Because she had wanted to share it, the way you share things with people you have decided are yours. Good, she said. She was still smiling from the coffee. Really good, actually. She wants to collaborate on a project. That's good, he said, and he sounded genuinely pleased in that quiet, private version of pleased that was the only version he had. She stopped in front of him. He straightened. They were close, closer than they often stood, because the hallway was narrow or because neither of them had made the distance, one of those things. Kale, she said. I'm ready. He went very still. I'm sure, she said. I needed to be sure, and I am. I know what I feel, and I know it's real, and I know you're real, and She stopped. Took a breath. I am done waiting for the good thing to go wrong. That's not me choosing not to be careful. That's me deciding that some things are worth the risk. He looked at her for a long moment. You're sure, he said. Quiet. Not a challenge. Just confirmation. Making sure. I'm sure, she said. He reached out. That same slow, deliberate, nothing rushed movement from the kitchen weeks ago. He brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. The bruised one. Almost healed now. Faint. Still there. And it was the most careful thing she had ever felt. The most seen she had ever been. Not in the way of being watched. In the way of being known. Okay, he said softly. Okay, she said. And right there in the hallway, under the flat overhead light, with no music and no grand setting and nothing romantic about the fluorescent lighting whatsoever, she stepped forward, and he folded around her, and she let him, and it was the quietest and most enormous thing that had happened to her in years. Okay. I need a moment. I need you to take a moment too. And while you're taking that moment, go and leave a comment below about how you are feeling right now, because I know you have feelings and I want to hear them. Drop a like on this video and share it with somebody who deserves a good love story. Because we are not done. We are nowhere near done. And the next part is where everything changes again. Let's go. 6 months later, the city knew something had shifted. Not because Kale Ryan announced anything, because Kale Ryan announced nothing, but because certain things become visible regardless of intention. She was seen. At his side. At events she gradually became willing to attend. At the cafe table that was always empty. She had abandoned the gray hoodie. Not thrown it away. She kept it folded in a drawer because it was part of a chapter she didn't need to erase, just close. And wore instead the colors she had worn before. The bright and warm and unashamed ones. She laughed loudly in restaurants and had opinions about wine, and once argued so confidently with a gallery curator about a piece of installation art that Kale had leaned against the wall with his arms crossed watching her and wearing an expression that Jaron, who was present and was not paid to have observations, described in his personal notes as comprehensively gone. She was, undeniably, unambiguously, herself again. Not the same self as before the 3 years. That self was not coming back, nor did she want her back exactly. This self knew things, carried things, had been reduced, and had chosen, slowly and imperfectly, and with help she had learned to accept, to rebuild. This self wore her gold earrings every day. This self had a new client roster and a studio space she shared with the designer she had met for coffee. This self knew every exit in every room she entered and was making peace with the fact that she probably always would, and that this was not a flaw. It was armor that had kept her alive, and she could honor that without living in it forever. She had moved into his apartment 3 months ago. Not officially. Officially, she still had the key to 714, still kept a few things there, still maintained the fiction of adjacency, because she was, even in happiness, cautious in the specific way that people who have been through what she has been through remain cautious. But practically, actually, in every way that mattered, she lived there. She slept with the lights off now. She cooked in his kitchen more evenings than not. She had rearranged the bookshelf in the living room, and he had looked at it for approximately 1 full minute, and then said nothing, which was his specific version of approval. His mother called her every Sunday. This was not requested by either of them. Jesus had simply decided, in her absolute and cheerful way, that this was now a tradition, and Dara had been shown by example what it looked like to be loved by Orion. And what it looked like was, firmly, completely, with no exit conditions attached. She was still getting used to it. She suspected she might be getting used to it for a long time. On a Thursday evening that was ordinary in every external respect, Kale came home later than expected. She was at the dining table with her laptop when she heard the door. She could tell from the sound of his footsteps. She had learned his footsteps the way you learn the specific sounds of a home you have decided to inhabit, that something was on his mind. He set down his bag. He came to the dining table. He sat across from her without saying anything, which was not unusual, except his hands were folded on the table and his eyes were on her, and the particular quality of his quiet was different from the usual kind. What happened? She said. Nothing happened, he said. She waited. I want to ask you something, he said. Okay. He reached into his jacket pocket. He set something on the table between them. A box. Small. The particular shade of box that doesn't require explaining. Dara looked at it, then at him. I'm not going to give you a speech, he said. You know me well enough to know I'd do it badly. A pause. But I need you to know that every good thing in my life is better because you're in it. You took something in me that had been running on survival, and you made it possible to want things. To actually want them. He looked at the table briefly, then back at her. I want you. Not as something I keep safe. Not as something I manage. As a person who has chosen me and who I am trying every day to be worth choosing. Another pause. You changed the bookshelf. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cry. I'm still annoyed about the bookshelf, he said, in a tone that was entirely not annoyed. But I haven't moved anything back. She was crying now. She had not expected to cry. She had always thought, in the abstract, that she would be composed at a moment like this. She was not composed. She was crying and laughing, and he was looking at her with that entire unwavering attention of his, steady and certain. You're bad at speeches, she confirmed, through the crying. I know, he said. Is that a yes? She looked at the box. She looked at him. She thought about a gray hoodie. A 2 a.m. knock. A key on a dresser. A bowl of Dunjang jjigae. An elevator in the dark. A hand that held hers without conditions. She thought about a woman who had learned to make herself invisible and was now, slowly, imperfectly, all the way alive, refusing to. Yes, she said. He opened the box. The ring was not flashy. He knew her well enough to know she wouldn't want flashy. It was simple, warm gold, a dark stone at the center that caught the light the way his eyes did. He slid it onto her finger. He did not say anything for a moment. He held her hand in both of his and looked at it the way he looked at things he was committing to memory. Then he looked up at her. She was still crying. He reached across and brushed her face with his thumb, the same gesture from the hallway, the same careful completeness of it. And she turned her face into his hand the way a person turns toward warmth. Dara, he said. She said. You changed my life, he said. She looked at him. You changed mine first, she said. They were married in the spring. Not a large wedding. Kale had argued mildly for something small, and she had not argued at all because small was what they both wanted, though neither had wanted to be the first to say it. 40 people in a place outside the city where the hills were just beginning to green, and the light came down warm and unhurried. Hesu cried from the first song. Jiren stood at the back in his usual position of blending into backgrounds and was seen by exactly one person who was paying close attention, rubbing his eye at some point during the vows. Yemi flew in from London and cried so loudly during the ceremony that she had to step outside briefly and then came back and resumed crying, which Dara found entirely fitting. Kale wore a suit that was nearly the same dark shade as his eyes. He looked, at the altar, like a man who had been patient with the universe for a very long time and was finally, deliberately, showing it why. She walked to him in a dress the color of deep gold. No veil. She didn't want anything over her face, which felt like a quiet private thing only she fully understood. Earrings in. Head up. Fully visible. Fully herself. Fully there. He watched her walk toward him. When she reached him he said, quietly, just for her, you look like you. Which was the most perfect thing he had ever said to her. You cleaned up all right, she said. He looked at the ceiling in that way he had. The officiant coughed politely. 7 months later, she showed him the test. He was in the kitchen. Of course he was in the kitchen. He was always in the kitchen when things happened. The kitchen had become, in the mythology of their life together, the place where things became real. He was making something complicated and narrating quietly to himself in the way she had come to love. She set the test on the counter. He looked at it. He went still. He looked at her. She watched his face do something she had never seen it do before. Something that broke open all the careful architecture of composure and let out something raw and enormous and completely unguarded. His eyes went bright in the way that only happened when something was too large to contain. Dara, he said. I know, she said. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and pulled her into him and held her the way you hold something that changes everything about what comes next, which was, she thought, exactly what it was. She pressed her face against his chest. His arms were around her, both of them, completely, the way they had been since the first night he had told her she was safe now. A thing that had taken her a long time to believe in now. In this kitchen. In this life. in this impossible and improbable and entirely real thing they had built from a knock at 2 a.m. and a bowl of soup and 2 bags of sesame seeds. She believed fully. She was safe. Not because someone was keeping her safe. Because she had chosen it. Fought for it. Rebuilt herself into someone who could hold it. And this man, this strange, precise, deeply inconvenient man, who set calendar reminders not to talk to her, and made fermented soybean paste correctly, and had her name somewhere in his chest in ink that didn't come off, had simply been present for all of it, had held the space for her to become this person again. That was, in the end, all she had ever needed. We're going to need a bigger bookshelf, she said. He laughed into her hair. Full. Real. That rare version. I'll order one, he said. I'm going to rearrange it. I know. And you won't say anything. I'll say things. But you won't change it back. A pause. His arms tightened slightly. No, he said. I won't change it back. Outside the window, Seoul moved in its enormous and indifferent way. City of 10 million lives and 10 million stories. And in a kitchen on the 7th floor, something small and whole and permanent was beginning. The end. And that is the story of Dara and Kale Ryan. If you felt something reading this, if you cried a little or laughed a little or both at the same time, leave it in the comments. I want to know every single feeling. Drop a like because it genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you are new because there is so much more where this came from. And share this with someone who needs to believe in love that actually shows up, because it exists, and it looks exactly like this. Thank you for watching, besties. I will see you in the next one. End of story.